I just have to take a bit of a detour and just tell you a little bit about the crap that black guy is speaking there. That black guy, his name is Mnangagwa. Mnangagwa is the current president of Zimbabwe. He's only the second black guy to run Zimbabwe after white rule. So these blacks have had what used to be wonderful Rhodesia. They have now ruled it for 43 years. The whites had it for a grand total of 90 years. So the blacks have had it for 43 years, which is almost exactly half the length of the total time that the whites ruled it. And remember, when the whites went there, there was nothing there. There were just huts and bush. There was no infrastructure of any kind whatsoever. Whereas these blacks have inherited functioning countries with full infrastructure, working infrastructure from the whites. And the whites even taught them and showed them how to run it all. It is truly a hideous, disgusting thing that has been done there. But Mnangagwa is now the president, and he managed to come to power through his own trickery against the previous trickster, Robert Mugabe. Robert Mugabe was really the clever black guy, the cunning, ruthless black guy who came to power first. He was the prime enemy of the whites. But Mnangagwa worked for Mugabe and was one of the government ministers who was reporting directly to Mugabe. Mnangagwa, in a nutshell, was Mugabe's chief murderer. That was his job. He made sure that any blacks who needed to be killed were killed quietly and gotten rid of. As time went by, Mugabe had so many enemies, and he had so many people, even people close to him, turning on him, and he needed to have them killed. So Mnangagwa organized all the killing. So you're looking at the murderer-in-chief of Mugabe, who is now the president of Zimbabwe. And all of these blacks are commies, and they learned from the Russians. They learned about the killing and the murdering. And people like J.B. Campbell have spoken about that. And all of these blacks across Africa who are presidents and government ministers, they are making big amounts of money. When whites ruled Africa, all the whites of Africa, whether it was Ian Smith or the Portuguese or the South Africans, the whites who ruled in Africa were extremely frugal. Their salaries were a pittance of the salaries these black, worthless garbage get these days. These blacks are busy making not just millions of dollars, but billions of dollars. They are stinking rich. You should see the palaces they live in. You should see the things they own. White men never were so wasteful and were never greedy, thieving scum. All of these black leaders, without exception, all of these blacks in parliament, without exception, in any black country, including South Africa, these people are here to steal and to feed at the trough. They are here for the gravy train, all of them. So when they get stuff, like these helicopters and things, exactly how many of those helicopters will actually be used for real government purposes, etc., remains to be seen. These people are busy wheeling and dealing and stealing, and they're up to all kinds of nonsense. I know, I've heard many stories from whites that I knew personally who dealt with blacks or who were in various places. The corruption in Africa is unmatched. So Mnangagwa is just yet another black commie, and they know and they liaise directly with the Russians. And as you can see, there's the Russian minister there coming and talking to the blacks, and he's telling them, we're defending our democracy, we're defending our state, just like you in Zimbabwe are defending your state. Yeah. But I just want to tell you some of the bullshit that black guy, Mnangagwa, is talking that the rest of you would never pick up on. In his speech there, he says, we live in a place, in a country that is prone to cyclones, and we are so thankful that we've got these helicopters because we can't get spare parts for the Western-made helicopters. And the reason they can't get the spares is because America has started putting sanctions on Zimbabwe and on those thieving scum at the top. So that is why they now apparently can't get spare parts for the helicopters, etc. So I don't have a problem with some sanctions against those blacks. And let me tell you that the sanctions against those blacks is mainly against those black leaders. And those nations are otherwise able to trade completely freely. You cannot even begin to compare the wussified little bit of sanctions that is put on Zimbabwe with the kinds of sanctions that was put on the whites of Rhodesia. You cannot even compare it. It is like maybe 5% as bad as what the whites of Rhodesia had to face. The whites of Rhodesia were clobbered straight in the teeth. Anyway, so this black guy goes on and he says, we are subject to cyclones and the region gets hit by cyclones, and then he talks about Malawi and Mozambique. Now, Mozambique is on the coast. It's the former Portuguese territory, and yes, it does experience a cyclone now and then. I stand to be corrected, but I don't think the cyclones that Mozambique experiences are as bad as some of those cyclones that hit America in Florida. So yes, I'll accept that now and then. This is not a continual thing, okay? Now and then, every so many years, there might be a cyclone that hits Mozambique. But Malawi and Zimbabwe are hundreds of kilometers inland. Let me tell you that there's no cyclone that actually hits Zimbabwe or Malawi in any way. Maybe they have some kind of windy weather, maybe they have some extra rain, but trust me, it is nothing like what the Americans get clobbered with in Florida, in the state of Florida, when they have cyclones. So when he says, oh, we are in a region where we got all these cyclones that are coming, cyclones, as if cyclones are like an annual problem. That's the other thing, is the cyclones are not an annual problem, and they don't reach inland. And in all the years that I lived in Rhodesia, and that I knew people that lived there, and that I looked at the history of Rhodesia, I have never come across any instance where the whites even batted an eye over the issue of cyclones, because it's nothing. It doesn't affect those countries in any way that is severe. And that is true for Zimbabwe and for Malawi. But here's this big black murderer crybaby, and he is now saying, oh, we are living in a region that's got cyclones, and we are so grateful that we finally have these helicopters. I'm sure you don't really need all of that just for the cyclones. For a cyclone that might hit you once in 10 years, once in 20 years. These things are not a huge issue, and they're not annual. But the big old lying murderer crybaby makes out like it's a huge problem. This is very similar to these blacks, also in Zimbabwe, who went on a rampage for years. First they go and they kill the farmers and they destroy their agricultural industry. Then for the next 10 years, they run around saying, oh, we're suffering from droughts, we're suffering from droughts. The droughts, there's such a drought problem. No, there isn't a drought problem, you asshole. You are the cause of your own problems. It's almost like the story of the orphan, where the child murders his own parents, and then when he's murdered his own parents, he sits and cries, oh, help me, I'm an orphan, I'm an orphan. Somebody help me. That's exactly the situation the blacks are in, is they created their own problems. Anyway, Zimbabwe or Rhodesia did have droughts. There were droughts when I was there, and I must tell you that even when we had bad droughts, It was never a case that we're going to run out of food or anything like that. The whites were always producing food. The whites always had extra food. The whites could always export. And you'll never see that the whites in the past, no matter how long ago it is, you'll never see that the whites of that region, whether they were the whites of Rhodesia or the Portuguese in Mozambique, you'll never see instances where the whites were running around, oh, we're running out of food, droughts are a huge problem, droughts, we're going to die because of droughts, we need food because of droughts. You'll never see that having happened in the past, okay? But these big black crybabies, they're always talking and crying and whining. Meanwhile, the real problem is they killed the white farmers who were feeding them, who were driving their economy. They're too lazy and too useless to grow their own food, and now they're looking for free handouts from the rest of the world again. It's back to blacks with their begging bowl, and it's as simple as that. So you'll see these black crybabies, they wanted control of countries, they were willing to kill whites to get control of countries, they stole everything they could lay their hands on, they murdered those they needed to murder, and now they turn around and oh no, I can't handle it because I got cyclones and I got sanctions and I got droughts. Yeah, sure. I don't feel your pain, you worthless fool. And there are no whites who were in those situations or even worse situations than them who ever turned around and was crying and whining like a baby. Whites always could look after themselves. But I thought I'd just have that little rant there because these people, let me tell you, if you had to know how much money those blacks have got, those blacks live in houses, the likes of which you will never live in. They, in some cases, own aircraft and have access to things that you will never have access to, that even billionaires in America won't have access to. And there they stand, oh, we need this, we need that. Oh yes, and that's another thing. All these big black leaders in Africa, all of them are running around begging white people for food, for money. Our people are suffering, they say. Meanwhile, they are stealing everything. And they're stealing from and cheating their own people. They live a screwed up existence, and it's not our problem. And we whites, we've got a completely different way of running countries and looking after ourselves and functioning as a group. We are not like that, and we never run into those problems because we are far better organized and we think ahead and we use our skills and our savvy. So you'll never have seen a white man in Africa running around crying for food or for any other help. The whites always took care of things, and when whites ruled Africa, Africa was a net exporter of all kinds of food, animals, you name it. Agricultural production was pouring out of Africa during colonialism. Now, all these blacks all of them are importing food. They're importing food. Worthless garbage.